Hi, this is just a quick video to get out between larger projects. I promise this is the last one about night-related discourse. Really, I do. But I just wanted to dedicate this video to a specific topic. Carol being the caller, and how it represents one of the more frustrating aspects of Deltarune discussion and theory crafting, and that is to treat Deltarune as if it's a puzzle that needs to be solved, rather than a narrative conveying plot beats to us. No matter who you think the knight is, the storytelling makes it extremely clear that Carol was the one to call Chris in the manor. To believe otherwise is just trying to overthink the story, in service of a subversion for the sake of it. First off, let's quickly go over the scene itself. Chris calls a mysterious unknown person, informing them they let Susie get the guitar, then the caller explicitly says, "I will be right there," to then introduce a character very shortly after his storytelling shorthand for this character is the person who was on the phone, and the rest of the context surrounding the scene only hammers this point home. Carol has a similarly dominating, creepy vibe as the caller. Her first action was to take the guitar from Susie, the very thing the caller was concerned about, and has seen Chris off in such a way that shows her control over them, that she still cares about them on some fucked up level, and that alludes to her knowledge of the player. The story does everything short of looking directly at the camera and saying Carol is the caller. Now, people have some questions and doubts about this, of which I'll try to cover. First, we'll talk about some of the logistics of Carol being the caller, and then we'll cover the far more important whys from a storytelling point of view. And lastly, we'll talk about some alternative ideas surrounding the caller that we're just not a fan of. It's fair to ask how Carol could sound like that. It's unlikely to be that the caller's in a dark world because phones simply don't work in them. Rather, my explanation is simple. She just sounds like that because she's using a voice filter. And she does so to obfuscate her identity while talking about evil conspiracy shit, should anyone be listening in. Chris erases their contacts and call history after the "I'll be right there" call. This is either to prevent us from calling them back, or to prevent us from seeing which person in their contacts called them. The latter implies the caller is someone who would normally be in their phone, like Carol. The reason she doesn't have the funny voice in the weird route is similarly simple. It was a normal, mundane call about Noelle. She has no reason to use a voice filter. The scene wouldn't work tonally if the staticky horror voice was used. Being the knight or plotting a conspiracy doesn't mean Carol is incapable of using the phone normally. Additionally, should anyone be listening in on their calls, it would sound incredibly suspicious if this weird horror voice said, "Hello Chris, it is I, Carol Holiday, letting you know my daughter, Noelle Holiday, is looking forward to spending time with you at the festival." That would create a very clear tie between the voice used to talk about group chat chicanery and her real identity. Rather, it makes more sense for Carol to use the filter while talking about their plans, and turning it off when she has something mundane to say. It's proven a very effective strategy if there's this much doubt she's the caller. And Carol has a very clear reason to hide her identity. She knows about the soul. She knows Chris is possessed, that we are listening, and neither she nor Chris can truly know our intentions. It then makes sense for them to take precautions, to hide information from us. Chris does so numerous times. They refuse to open the church closet door the knight is hiding in. They chuck us into a box while speaking with the caller, even for them to just close their eyes when looking at Azrael's search history, or to stop looking at the newspaper discussing Asgore's removal from the Force. They don't want us knowing about their personal life, the people they care about, or their plans. We may want to save Des, to find her .org, but how could they know? And even if they did, how could they trust us? After all, we have the capacity to do truly awful things. And now, on to narrative reasons for the static voice. Carol, at that point in the story, had not yet been introduced. The scene is meant to build intrigue as to who the person on the other end of the line is, that there's more to the night plotline than them just opening dark worlds on their wands, that they're working with other lightners, and more importantly, with Chris, our vessel. And the scene is written with a creepy tone. Who is forcing Chris to take part in this, to work against their friends, to stay possessed, to sacrifice Undyne, to then just have Carol speak normally over the phone, to hear her in full, would significantly weaken the impact of the scene. Her normal voice would not be anywhere near as intimidating. She would just be some kind of lady. We haven't seen or heard her yet. Her walking in and denying the lesbians their Yuri would be far less impactful if her voice and talk sprite were already shown to the player over a Discord chat. The voice filter also serves the purpose of hiding information from the player. We're not meant to know the details of the conspiracy yet, so the stunted speech and missing words allow Toby to drip feed us with information without spilling too much, and it builds suspense leading to Carol's introduction. And that introduction tonally matches with the calls. Noelle's reaction to her mother's arrival, the creepy ambience of C, the way everything just stops. The room drops 5 degrees and an overwhelming sense of dread washes over us. Now, there are two aspects of the weird route that cast doubt on her being the caller. The fact she shows up without Chris calling her, and the fact she calls him at the end using her normal voice. For the first point, we know she was planning on staying out, given that she asks Noelle about eating on her own, so like, in the normal route, something had to serve as a catalyst to cause her to show up. Now, I don't have a clear-cut idea what that catalyst could be. It's possible Chris called or texted her in between scenes, or maybe Chris failing to phone her at all prompted Carol to go check on them. Maybe Asgore could have called her, due to noticing that Noelle was unwell. Susie was snooping around, and Chris was in the bathroom freaking out. He did make them a hot chocolate to feel better after all. Maybe Carol even just suspected something was up from her call with Noelle, and decided to check in on her own. And it's more likely the exact reason doesn't matter. As with Carol's passage to the church, maybe Toby just didn't deem it important enough to explain. We understand the important plot beats, the specifics and logistics are secondary. Additionally, it would take away from the gravity of the scene we just caused. If the story came to a halt, to just set up Carol's arrival shortly after, the player needs a moment of quiet to let what they've just done to Noelle sink in. The pacing wouldn't work if you set time aside right bang in the middle for Chris to call Carol. The player is the menacing presence in the weird route, not her. Anything Carol can do, whether she's the knight or not, is nothing compared to us. And for the final scene of the weird route, we've already covered why, in universe, Carol would use her normal voice. So now let's tackle the subject from a narrative perspective. Why would Toby write the scene this way? For one, most players at this point would already know Carol as the caller. You're likely intended to play the weird route after the normal route, so things such as Carol's scenes and place in the story would already have been established. There's no need to re-establish them. And tonally, Carol speaking normally and casually fits more. The horror of the route stems from our relationship with Noelle, as well as how certain characters can't pick up on our abuse. For Carol to tell us Noelle is excited for the festival, completely ignorant of our actions, leaves us off on a far more haunting note than if she did so using the horror voice. Another part of the weird route is that it's writing other characters out of the story, removing Susie's romance with Noelle and literally killing off her other friend. It then makes sense that the Holiday Manor segment would be changed, to remove Susie and Noelle growing closer, to prevent us from looking into Death's room and learning more about her. The plot about Susie and Chris searching for the code to save Undyne, the reveal that Chris is working with the Knight, to remove Carol's entire on-screen appearance. Not only because you've seen that in the normal route as mentioned before, but it's also part of the punishment of playing the game this way, like in Chapter 2. In the church, the option Think of the Knight is replaced with Think of Noelle. It makes the plot of Deltarune center more and more around Chris and Noelle's relationship. This is epitomized by the last scene of the game, a scene that was illustrating Chris' struggle between their friends and their conspiracy with the Knight. It's changed to just be about you, and about her. There are also some common ideas surrounding the caller which I'd like to discuss. Frankly, I'm not a fan of the idea that there's a second caller. If this were the case, there are ways Toby would have made it more apparent, such as using a unique voice blip for the red text, or having the white and red text appear on different sides of the phone, or having them clearly respond to one another. This is a story. Important things such as there are two callers would not be left so vague that only ultra truck freak theorists would be able to figure out the truth. He would have made it more apparent. We also literally see Carol use red text in the conclusion of the Holiday Manor segment, unless you want to argue that Smallvin was off-screen and yelled, "You!" for a single line. The caller using red text is not indicative of a second party. It was just to add emphasis and menace. Additionally, there's a number of explanations that try to reconcile why Carol would show up when she did, without being the caller. Here's the ones that I'm aware of on screen, and their issues. A lot of this next section was already covered in the Carol Knight video. Here's a timestamp, but I'll go over it again so as to not make the video necessary reading. As mentioned up top, the strongest point towards Carol being the caller is that the setup of the scene very clearly implies as much. The phrasing of "I'll be right there" is extremely clear. The caller themselves would be right there. Trying to force ambiguity here just doesn't make sense. Sometimes though, people take the obvious and rather than taking it face value, we try to find some hidden truth beneath the actual storytelling. For example, the idea that the caller said I'll be sending Carol right there, or something to that effect, which we couldn't hear because of the static. But this reveal would be rather pointless. It's effectively identical to Carol having called Chris herself. It just makes the caller seem superfluous. It really changes nothing. Then there's also the idea that I'll be right there refer to themselves going to the church, but like, come on. Hi Chris, I'll be right there. And by right there, I mean going to the church, which is completely unrelated to the guitar, the reason you called me in the first place. Oh, I'll send Carol home to deal with the guitar instead, but I won't make this part clear at all. This, on the face of it, is just very convoluted. It doesn't make sense and would be poor storytelling. It doesn't work on any level. And lastly, the idea that Carol's just not in the group chat, which again, I ask what's the point of setting it up like she is? Sure, it sets up the reveal that someone else was the caller, causing some shock or surprise, but like that's not how Deltarune handles twists. It does not lie to the player. Even the quote-unquote red herrings go somewhere and have a point to them outside of vapid shock value anyway. And the twist that she isn't in on the conspiracy would just keep Carol out of the story. She's clearly an important character, one who is both conducting and playing a part in the conspiracy. We don't have infinite chapters. The Knights already had a ton of build-up and menace, so I don't see why we should sacrifice a Carol plot beat and give it to the Knight, a character who's had one scene, versus one who's had an entire chapter playing the villain. Carol should at the very least be allowed to play receptionist for Night Corp. Now, some of you are saying, well, there are things that point to Carol not being in with the Knight, and I'll tackle points relating to that now. First is the corkboard in Carol's room. People argue that must mean that she doesn't know as much, that she can't be part of the real conspiracy, but this is kinda nonsense. If anything, having a corkboard to show how she learned about Dark World stuff, or to lay out the plan as Asgore says, shows that she is extremely knowledgeable, and the intention of the board is likely to just convey that she's a conspiring character, and one who's been planning out this conspiracy for a long time. It's a detail that exists to characterize her without having to have her actively be on screen, and this intent is fairly clear. Then there's Triple Trucy's theory, which alleges that Chris Truces in Chapter 2 foreshadow that they are part of 3 separate conspiracies, working with Carol, with Asgore, and with the Knight. But this is bad on a number of levels. Here they are on screen. Please stop using it as evidence. Deltarune isn't going to be a convoluted mess of alliances. Please, I'm begging you, have more faith in the writers. Please. It's a story about the Fun Gang, the group chat, and Chris' struggle between them, not a summer camp shipping chart. Note, this is YouTuber, the channel owner speaking, not the corny horned creature. The story Twitter users expect Deltarune to be telling is that Chris called the Knight, who said they would be right there, and for Carol to have shown up right then and dealt with the problem herself by pure coincidence. That Chris is secretly working with an older holiday woman, someone who cares about them, but who also has them under her thumb, and that Carol just coincidentally has the exact same relationship with Chris, and that the Knight has a secret conspiracy that they're working towards with a dreamer, and that Carol's conspiracy is completely unrelated. Her narrative role is identical to the Knight's, but she isn't the Knight. Now, I'm a Carol Knighter. I'm obviously going to be biased, and see a lot of this as people writing off what, to me, is clear evidence of a theory I strongly believe in. But this isn't even a Carol Knight vs Death Knight thing. It's fine if you believe in Death Knight. I'm trying to be less of a dick about that, and there are good reasons to think Death is the Knight, even if I disagree. But to say Carol can't even be on the phone with Chris, that she can't possibly be in on the group chat conspiracy is just patently incorrect, and it's frustrating to see so many people completely write her off, that she can't be part of this story. Carol has so much foreshadowing in previous chapters. She's the reason there's no crime in town. She personally scared burglars to death. She's above the police. She's a cringe ninja who attacks people with katanas. She has deep ties to numerous ostensibly important characters. She's clearly being set up as a major antagonist, whether or not she's the Knight. Carol matters. And on a broader note, the main takeaway we want this video to have is to change how people look at stories, to stop engaging with them like they're Five Nights at Fountains with no substance other than hiding secret lore, that they exist to make you feel something and express a broader message. To take a step back and look at things and ask why you're being shown things in a story, what the author's intent is, what players at large are meant to think. To look at the big picture and overall context of scenes. To look at existing characters and plot points and ask what they're setting up. And to be mindful that when attempting to predict future plot points, we ask ourselves, is the story really building up to this? And like, Really, is trying to solve future plot points even what art is about? Like, we're not saying to never theorize, but rather that this need to predict, to solve Deltarune is hindering folks' ability to see what we already have in the present. To conclude that the author is unreliable, the plot points can't possibly be clear-cut, that the truth can only be found in niche corners of the game with no mind paid to the greater context. It just poisons the well, and makes it harder to see what the story is actually trying to communicate, in service of chasing a mirage of imagined plot points that may or may not happen. With Carol, for example, by reducing her role in the story, you lose the ability to tackle heavy topics, like parental abuse and manipulation. A competent writer wouldn't set those things up for no reason, especially when they're given so much focus and tie into the greater story. These are things that must be resolved. How they'll be resolved, we can't say with certainty. We can't predict exact plot beats, no one can, and Deltarune is really good at obscuring information. But what we can be certain of is the characterization and the themes present in the chapters we already have. What was on the final panel? We have our ideas, but at the end of the day, no one can know for sure, until we see it for ourselves anyway. But what we can be certain of is it must tie into Susie's broader arc, and make predictions based on that. To try outsmarting the plot in an effort to dodge Tony's iconic trick is missing the forest for the trees. It's overlooking the narrative themes and characters, which are what really matters in this story. Really, think about what you're getting from art. I know it makes us sound like aberrant, but Deltarune and stories at large are wonderful things when you let yourselves truly engage with what they're saying. In summary, let us stop asking who is the cooler, and begin asking why is the cooler. Wow, off script bit, I'm the corny horn creature. I'm fucking ill recording one of these again. Yeah, this video is just a quick one. Hopefully we never have to talk about the Roaring Knight again. I'm so sick of talking about this stupid fucking character. But oh my god, it's really annoying to see a scene that clearly isn't written with ambiguity be like interpreted like this. It's just kind of silly, and you often see people claiming that the fandom is like out of its like silly Gastafury era. And often those same people are like being like, what if there's two coolers? When it's clearly not intended to be read that way. Oh, God. Like, it doesn't really matter who you think the knight is, but Carol is clearly the one on the phone, and she's clearly involved in the Dark World conspiracy in some way. I don't know. I'm just repeating the fucking video. I made the cool thumbnail. Hell yeah. I hope the sprite art for this one's good. I hope you love it all. Thanks for watching. YouTuber over and out. Make sure to subscribe, like the video, comment, share it with your friends and your family, repost it on TikTok in like a cool edit, debate about it on Twitter, be really annoying and get in our like replies. It would be really funny if you do that, specifically on Chaco Chilla's account. Please reply to all of his shit about Death Knight. It really makes him happy. He loves Death Knight so much. Please!